Are you familiar with this image? And this one? How about this one? And this one? All of these photographs have one thing in common. They were all shot with the same camera. This camera. It's the Hasselblad 500c. This should be fun. Please hit subscribe. In 1957, Victor Hasselblad released the 500c. It is a prime example of beautiful design, keen style, precise function, and iconic photographic history. Perhaps the 500c is best known for these images. This is the first photograph of Earth taken from space by human on the Apollo 8 mission. And this is the first human on the moon. Hasselblad and NASA collaborated to create a camera for space missions. But for those of us grounded on Earth, this camera can still lift us to lofty heights. That was a little cheesy, but still poetic, maybe. Lofty heights in a camera. Let's take a look at some of its photographic history. I am not the first, nor will I be the last photographer, professional, hobbyist, amateur, to laud the praises of the 500c. Perhaps no other camera, except Leica, holds the legendary status of Hasselblad. But Hasselblad excels at medium format. There's so much packed in this camera. Form, style, function, legendary history, and just plain sexiness. Can I say sexy? It's pretty sexy. And just plain sleek coolness. Photographers from 1957 and beyond have given us images that define us culturally. Here's just a few. And here are some not so legendary, but very enthusiastic images that I've shot with this camera. I feel very fortunate to own this camera. It is my second film camera right on the heels of a Mamiya RB67. Unboxing that first camera, my father-in-law says about as deadpan as possible, "You know, we have a Hasselblad in the basement." I didn't know and told him that I would sure like to see it. He let me play with it. I was immediately enamored. The camera, a 1966 vintage, was purchased new by his favorite uncle. It had been unused for a long time, and it needed help. Fungus on the lens, gooey action, but it cleaned up beautifully. Though the 500c was not Victor Hasselblad's first camera, that was the 1600, it did come with certain innovations that set the tone for medium format cameras to come. Functionally, the 500c is a marvel. It is completely manual and completely modular. It's basically a light-proof box with a mirror. It's got the Hasselblad innovative removable backs, interchangeable bayonet lenses, and interchangeable viewing systems. But what speaks to the functionality more than anything else is the size. Unlike the other medium format cameras that I have, the Hasselblad for a medium format SLR is small, light, and portable. Rolleiflexes and Rolleicords, for instance, are a little bit smaller, but they don't have the modular nature of a Hasselblad, nor do you have interchangeable lenses. So, for what this does, compared to its size, super impressive. I'm not a car guy, but I'm going to torture some car analogies here just because it might be fun. A rollie, definitely cool, reminds me of a classic Woody, complete with a surfboard sticking out of it. The Mamiya is like a big old fatty Cadillac limousine, and the Zenza is a small tank or Hummer. In my mind, the Hasselblad 500c is no Volvo. It's more like a 1957 Porsche. You see it? See? See? The 500c was the first time that Hasselblad went to exclusively a Zeiss lens. Before that, he'd been working with Kodak and had a few Kodak lenses, some Zeiss lenses, but the big difference with the 500c was a Zeiss leaf shutter lens. That was a departure for Hasselblad away from focal plane shutters. This lens, a Zeiss planar 80mm 2.8, is still somehow sharp, but it's also elegant, classic, and sophisticated. One thing I like about this style of medium format cameras is that removable backs are such a luxury. I have two backs. This one is what they call an A12. It shoots 12 negatives, 6x6. And my other one is a relatively obscure 16 Super Slide, which is really fun to say. It shoots a negative that's about 4x4, so quite a bit smaller. I like to use the Super Slide for street photography because I get a bonus 4 shots. I was shocked when I first developed these negatives because I thought I'd done something wrong. I couldn't figure out for the life of me why my negatives were smaller. It took a little bit of research until someone on a forum kind of explained things to me. Though I find that the Hasselblad is really easy to use, there are a few tips I have to go with it. The first has to do with the auxiliary shutter. Though the main shutter is in the lens, there is a rear double flap just to keep the film darker between shots. However, if shooting at speeds lower than 1/30th of a second, you need to hold the shutter release down to prevent the auxiliary shutter from screwing up your shot. And for long exposures, turn a small dial around the shutter button from O to T, which locks the auxiliary shutter open until you move the dial back to O. If you want to know what year your Hasselblad is, there's a number on the back of the mirror box. It will have 2 letters before a series of numbers. Those letters are part of a code. Here, on this one, TT represents 1966. The self-timer is a little difficult to figure out. It's next to the flash sync settings on the lens. It takes a little nudging. And what's cool about the Zeiss leaf shutter is that it flash syncs at all speeds. 2 very small complaints I have with the 500c is that for the dark slide, there's no handy place, unlike my Mamiya or the Zens I have, to stash your dark slide. I have to end up usually putting it in a pocket, usually in my back pocket, and I'm often afraid I'm going to lose it or sit on it and bend it. So finding a good place for it's very challenging. The other thing that's missing from the Hasselblad, I think because of the year of its design, there's no handy-dandy little place to put the tab of the film type you're using. So there is a little dial on the back of the film backs that's pretty nifty, but I find it a little vague and a little difficult to use and hard to read. So what I end up doing is taking some adhesive medical tape, and I'll put that on the bottom of the film back and write what type of film I'm using. The other thing with the Hasselblad that you need to know is that there is no through-the-lens light metering. Apparently, many of the ones that came out of the factory did have a winder which had a light meter in it. I do not have that. I will say, however, that I do find it extremely satisfying to use this handled winder. So I'm happy to use an external light meter. Another nifty thing about this Hasselblad is the depth of field meter on the lens. And it's got these 2 little red arrows, and once you choose your f-stop and your shutter speed, it locks them together, and then the 2 red arrows move, showing you the range in which you're in focus. And as I'll show you on a certain photograph here, you can see that that depth of field can be pretty fine. My wife is barely out of focus here. The booth is in focus. And the other thing too is it's got these red numbers on the right hand side of the lens, which is actually an exposure value that you can utilize rather than worrying about such mundane things as shutter speed and f-stop, and blend them all into one exposure value number. Though this Hasselblad kit came with the prism finder, I'm not a big fan of it. I prefer using the waist level finder. I like it because it is a different perspective on the world of being lower, and your shots tend to be a little more, I think, artistic because they're aiming upwards at things. It keeps the camera out of my face, and people don't often know that you're taking a picture of them as you're looking down. We're so used to it being up at eye level. But regardless, I have it, and it'd be good for some studio shots. I've done a few, but I'm still kind of attached to the waist level finder. On eBay right now, comparable Hasselblad 500c with a Zeiss lens and maybe a back or two will run you about between $1,200 and $2,000. Many photographers will tell you not to get too sucked into the equipment, that a bad camera can take a great photo and a great camera can take a bad photo. They're absolutely right. I will say, however, that especially with this Hasselblad 500c, just the beautiful design, the excellent functioning, and the storied history inspires me to shoot better, to shoot more, and I feel more connected to the art form when I'm shooting a camera of this caliber. That's it. That's the Hasselblad 500c. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you. Please hit subscribe. Take care.